Bitcoin, July 27th, and we're seeing that the middle of the channel, which we had already noticed in previous weeks, has actually turned out to be much stronger than we thought. If we had to choose between these three areas, resistance, support, and the middle of the channel, normally the middle of the channel is always softer. That is, when Bitcoin's price moves through this area, the movements usually aren't so drastic. In other words, it doesn't reverse as much or stay there as long as it does when it's a support or resistance. But in this channel, because every channel, every movement has its own characteristics, in this case, the middle of the channel is very strong. And we've even seen this rejection at 64, when normally we would have already started looking for the lower area. It's going to be a bit tough to break through this 64 zone. Every single time it gets close, obviously it's just like glass. The first time, it just makes a little crack. The second time, that crack gets even bigger. And then by the third time, it finally manages to break right through that middle of the channel. I'm Michael Vasquez. After more than 15 years in professional trading, I'd tell you that the only thing that really works to see what the price is going to do is to look for the strategies of the institutions or big players. They're the ones constantly trying to trick retail traders, grab their liquidity, and make their move. What we do on this channel is look at those strategies, those clues, because the big players leave clues with the volume. We look for those clues day after day, and that's how we build our strategies, by overlapping them with the strategies of the big players, instead of just following indicators that give you signals that are either from the past, false, or have nothing to do with what the price is actually going to do. All right, that being said, if what you're interested in is making money with trading, whether professionally or as a side job, I've designed a course where you'll stop looking at indicators and start understanding what the market is really doing, what the big players are actually doing, and you'll be able to make money the way they do. Let's continue with the analysis. At the end of the video, we'll also talk about how the July challenge is going, and we'll look at the forecast using those Wyckoff zones, both in the long term and for the week. Today is Monday, July 27th, and we're going to see how this price develops over the course of this week. All right, as you know, we start on the 4-hour chart, but we always like to look at the weekly chart to see the Wyckoff zone for the week. Okay, we're on the weekly chart now, meaning each candle now represents a week, and we're looking at the long term. These are the months for 2025, 2026, and what we're seeing in Wyckoff. In my course, I explain the Wyckoff zones to you, but just so you understand, there's always an accumulation zone, a markup phase that's fast, a distribution zone, a markdown phase which is also fast, and then a distribution or a second accumulation zone. In this case, we're in an accumulation phase that comes before a bullish move. Very good. I told you it was accumulation ever since we saw the sell incline axe. We've already been in this situation for almost 2 months. Normally, sideways movements, accumulations, and distributions take a long time. You can see here too, 2, 3 months, even more. It can last 4 or 5 months in the long term in an accumulation phase that makes it seem like Bitcoin's price is never going to do anything again. It's not that. It's just that a lot is happening behind the scenes. The big players are accumulating little by little, because if they made their move all at once, they would push the price exactly in the opposite direction of what they want, and that wouldn't make sense. They always play these games in a discreet way, trying to trick retail investors. Very good. In the long term, we're in an accumulation phase and already looking for the lower end of that accumulation. With that in mind, let's move to the 4-hour chart. Looking at the historical data, we see that accumulation that goes from it entered the 69, 68 zone, broke through, and that's when the accumulation phase started. You can see that the mid-channel zone, which normally, as I mentioned, isn't that strong, in this case is actually showing up as very strong. And every time the price crosses it, the crack I was telling you about, where it gets weaker and weaker, isn't happening. Instead, the opposite is happening. It's getting stronger each time and pulling the price with even more force. In other videos of mine, if you've watched them, we've said that one zone or another, usually support or resistance, acts like a magnet. In this case, we've never said that the mid-channel acts like a magnet, but here, this 64,000 zone really is acting like a magnet. Let's bring up the volume because you already know that the big players always leave their traces in the volume, and that's exactly what we're looking for. I'm not sure if you can see it well because I pulled up a lot of historical data. Let's try to make it a bit clearer. All right, anything above 1.5 is the sign of the big players we've seen. As you know, not too many over the weekend. We expected the price to be more stagnant over the weekend. It stayed close to the 64,000 zone. We were expecting a bit more movement, some oscillation. However, it stayed close to the 64,000 zone, but without the oscillation we were expecting. And then when the week started, the week doesn't start on Monday morning, but on Sunday night, Spanish time, we saw that yes, it was already getting into the weekly dynamic and started a much more aggressive move with this huge price candle, but it wasn't matched by a similar move in volume. That is, for a candle like this, we were expecting at least 1.5 in volume. However, it didn't reach that. It barely brushed 1 billion. All right. Now, what we need to pay attention to is what the big players are doing with this volume and the shape of the candles. The 65 zone is also an area that over the previous weeks has been quite important. Now it's in this zone, it's going to be moving around here, and we'll be waiting a bit to see what New York does. Right now it's 11:30 in the morning, and you know that at 3:30 Spanish time, the New York Stock Exchange opens. A lot of funds make their moves then, both in stocks and other assets, but also in Bitcoin, and it usually has a significant reaction. Let's see how that movement overlaps. Most likely, the big players will use that momentum to push things in the direction they want. What we're waiting for is that move, like I said, close to 64 during this week, and to start seeing the price drop below 64 this week. However, we've seen that the rebound has been significant and that there's still strength around the 64 zone. That's why it's really important to see how the volume reacts when it reaches this area, which should happen sometime this week. So that's the forecast based on the clues we're seeing. It pretty much confirms what we said last week over the weekend, but with a slightly bigger rebound. Let's wait for that touch at 64. Now, we have both the long-term view in mind. You already know we're waiting for that markup, which isn't going to happen right now because in the long term, we're looking to drop down to the 60 zone. That's the next move. In other words, when it tries to climb back up to the 68 area, we'll see if that's the decisive move to break through or if it's going to keep accumulating for a while longer. That's why we're always analyzing all those clues that tell us the forecast for the price movement, whether it's long term, medium term, or very short term, like intraday, 15, 30 minutes. Right now, we're seeing a significant move as it reaches the 65 zone. As I told you before, the 64 price zone is the absolutely most critical area in this move. However, the 65 zone also has a bit of a noticeable reaction, and as you can clearly see, there's always a significant kind of shift, so to speak, in the overall price movement. What we can do for intraday trading is look for when it reaches important support or resistance levels on the 15 or 30-minute charts. You already know how to find them. I explain it in my course. But basically, you have to look for the zones where the price has reversed with a certain amount of volume. When it has done this several times, it's already given us a clue that it's a support or resistance zone. We should mark them, and when the price reaches that area, if significant volume appears along with the clue from Japanese candlesticks, those are three elements that give us the best moment in VSA to enter on the 15 or 30-minute chart for intraday or scalping. I also wanted to tell you that if you like doing intraday trading or scalping, I have a VIP Telegram group. Well, that's what I call it, on Telegram with 100 spots where I share my 2 trades that I make every day. Right now, I think there are about 80 members. It's open to anyone until we reach 100 members. When we reach 100 members, it'll only be for people who sign up on mxc.com. Speaking of MEXC, MEXC is where I do the challenge I started in July. Every month, I do a challenge where I start with $500 on the first of the month, in this case, July 1st, and every day I make very simple micro trades, $15, $20, $25, $30 at most. The last one was for $30. At the most favorable moment in line with the movement, in other words, going with the flow, I try to keep it short. The last trade I made was on Saturday. Today's Monday, and the price has gotten a bit stuck. For now, I'm holding on to it because I think the next move, a bit in the long term, well, in the short to medium term, sorry, is going to be to hit 64,000. That's the area where I set my take profit. For now, I'm going to keep it. And what I do is hedge against that excess. For example, right now it was at 900 and something dollars. I would raffle off those 400 and something among everyone who signs up at mexc.com and makes their first deposit. I'm Michael Vasquez, and this is Daily Bitcoin Analysis. Thank you so much for watching this video. And as I always say, this is not financial advice. I'm just sharing my experience with you after more than 15 years in professional trading. Pay close attention to what it's going to do around the 65 zone, how it's going to approach the 64 zone, and let's see what clues the chart gives us today and tomorrow morning. I'll make another video, another update, so you can stay up to date with Bitcoin's movements. See you soon.